Now, I do have this graphic because we got to look at this because some of the round casings were found on the other side of the roof. And what are the odds of that? Does he have an unhealthy overgassed rifle? Maybe the gas block's overcharged. I don't know, but we're gonna have to see. So we do have a couple more clips before we can wrap up the show because I wanted to get these last two pieces of evidence on the record. Did you have something there, LD?
Yeah, I'd shared. Here, let me bring it up on my screen.
Oh, right here.
I just wanted to remind us. Yeah, there you go.
Cool.
I'd passed this on to you Sunday the 14th, but I didn't quite understand until later. But that's the vantage point of this. If you click on this last link I just sent you, it puts together the map graphic that lays out what he was just describing as that other sniper position. So that building down there. So that photo that we briefly showed that Sunday night is that's what they're looking at from that position.
That's
apparently.
Interesting. That's a fancy mount for that rifle too.
Well, and I mean that's an IR or
Clear.
That's for use for nighttime shooting. We don't know that that's the weapon that was fired, but that's somebody holding the weapon up, taking a picture in that direction.
Who took that picture?
Well, I suspect it's one of the counter sniper team members.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you got to wonder if the kill shot of whoever died on that roof is from a shorter distance and smaller caliber, but we don't know.
Yeah, we don't. There's a lot about that we don't know yet. Still, amazingly enough, like who was the guy in the gray suit from ATF saying, "I don't have a cell phone, so take some pictures and send them to this number," right? Like, who's not being tracked? Maybe we'll find out a little bit in these last two clips. We're going to learn about the van location. And we're also going to learn about forensic tests that they refuse to do. It's a lone gunman. Why would you need to run up taxpayer dollars running silly tests for evidence so that we can understand? So let's go back to Legally Armed America, and then we'll go to Gary Hughes Investigates for the van investigation.
Hey there, friends. Do you feel like we're doing way more work than people who actually get paid to do work to figure out what the heck happened with the Trump assassination attempt? I do. First, guys, I want to tell you about my friends over at CMMG. They make some of the finest rifles on the planet. These guys make rifles in tons of different calibers, different Cerakotes, some of the most reliable firearms I've ever had. I've been a fan of theirs for many, many years. If you go to their website, you can use a code that I've heard about, FTATF, and you will get 10% off whatever you purchase. So if you check out my friends CMMG, you will save some money. Okay, guys, one of the biggest mysteries that I still don't feel like we have a solid answer on was how many pieces of brass were on the roof. If Crooks, according to FBI Director Wray, fired 8 shots, that's what he claims, and that's what he claims they found on top of the roof. If Crooks fired all 8 of those rounds, then we should be able to find those, right? They should be up there. We're on a 1-on-12 roof, so they're not going to roll off. They're simply not going to. We're talking about bottleneck brass. They're not going to roll off on this type of roof because you've got about a 20-inch little gap in between each one of the little rails that come up on the roof. So we know the rounds aren't rolling off. So everything should be contained on top of the roof. Well, the video that he put out did not effectively answer a lot of questions, and if they did anything with that video, it was to create more potential conspiracy and question marks. The first part of the video shows the guy on the scene, the SWAT guy, if you want to call him that, count out confidently 5 rounds.
Watch out for shell casings. 2, 3, 4, 5 right there.
Then several minutes later, 20 or so minutes later, as the video rolls, but more than that actually, because about 11 or 12 minutes was cut out of the middle of the video. Then when somebody else comes up there, now they count the 5, and then they count 3 additional ones, and those 3 additional ones, according to this SWAT guy, appear to be on the opposite side of the ridge, on the south side of the ridge facing Trump. So the 5 were on the north side where Crooks's body was, and 3 more, according to this guy, are on the south side. Now, it certainly didn't help their cause any by having that split in the middle taken out. A doctored video is a doctored video. When you leave something out, people assume you left something out for a reason. Certainly wasn't for time reasons, because you had about 20 minutes rolling on that video where nothing was discussed. So it couldn't possibly be that you were just saving something that was chopped up. So the extra 10 minutes would not make that much of a difference. So in order to determine for the average everyday person and the average gun owner too, somebody that does shoot on a regular basis, you may not pay attention to where your brass flies whenever you're shooting an AR-15. There are a lot of consistencies and a lot of similarities when shooting an AR-15, but just like anything else, the slightest little deviation in the build of that AR-15, the type of ammo, the buffer weight, there are so many things that come into play with where that brass is going to wind up. What I wanted to do is get as close as I can to that on my own. And I like doing stuff like this instead of the math and the geometry and the trigonometry. This is some caveman stuff, and I enjoy this type of research even more. So what I did, I took a bone stock Palmetto State Armory AR-15. The reason why I wanted to do this is because this thing does not have an adjustable gas block, and it's very unlikely with the DPMS model that Crooks had. It likely did not have an adjustable gas block, and that means something, and we'll get into that later, but that adjustable gas block is more of an upgrade. So with that DPS model being more of an entry-level model, it's unlikely that it had an adjustable gas block. Quick side note, point of irony here, I'm using a Palmetto State rifle who actually bought DPMS, and now they make DPMSs themselves, so probably a better product now than what it was back then. But I am using a bone stock Palmetto State. This thing right here has 0 modifications on it. This is straight out of the box. Now, because the FBI and the Secret Service are not giving us much information, I figured I would shoot .223 ammo and I would shoot .556 ammo. I'm doing this because I have heard the gun described both ways before, so I wanted to make sure that I did at least shoot both rounds. Now, to somewhat simulate the roof pitch, I decided to go ahead and put a table up on a stool to give it a little bit of an angle to get as close as I could to what we were dealing with. Now granted, the surface that the brass is going to fall onto is still level, not sloped like that, so there's going to be some disparities, but I'm not climbing on a roof in order to conduct this experiment. First thing I did was load up my .223 ammunition. 8 rounds into my Mission First Tactical magazine, and then onto my simulated roof to run off these shots. And I tried to do it in a similar cadence with the 3 slower paced and then the 5 fast paced. So what I did is I figured that where my ejection port was probably about 12 inches from the edge of the table. So I measured out from that to get where all of my rounds fell. And as you can see, they fell pretty far apart from one another. This is a pretty wide angle that these rounds were coming. So I did this several times with the .223 and then got an average and left the farthest ones out. Then I took an actual round of the .223 and I put it where the spent brass was. I wanted to be able to identify what rounds went where, because now I'm going to shoot the .556, so I wanted to keep something out there, and to not confuse the spent brass, I went ahead and put actual rounds out there. So I loaded up my .556 into my Mission First Tactical magazine, and here we go. Same cadence, slower 3, then faster 5. Really close, not a whole lot of disparities. If you notice these rounds, again, the full rounds were my .223 rounds, and the empty casings that you see here are from the .556. So really they fell within the same area. I did this exercise several times, and then I went ahead and did the same thing and put my 5.56 where the spent casings were, so you could see the differences between the types of ammo, the 223 and the 5.56. Now, the closest to the ejection port that I found was 7 feet. So I made sure that I kept that number 7 feet, knowing that that's the closest that one of these spent brass would fall. So I wanted to be able to get somewhat of a grid to determine where my pattern would lay next to where Crooks's body was on the roof. So in order to plot that out, I figured in front of my ejection port, going in front of me, it was 5 feet out where the closest casing went, and it was 2 feet behind me, behind the ejection port, where the farthest one behind me actually flew. Now, one thing that I wanted to mention real quick is that I took another firearm out there that shot 5.56. I took my custom Wyndham Weaponry Legally Armed America rifle out there. This is an older rifle with an old aim point optic on top of it. The purpose of this was to shoot one of the rounds, and I shot a couple of them, but one of them that you'll see here, I shot one round to show you what the difference in the brass is. And the reason why is because if for some reason the FBI and the Secret Service now, because they've picked all these brass rounds up and washed the roof off, if they now say, oh, we're pretty sure they were all shot from the same gun, I mean, of course they would. Take our word for it, right? There is somewhat of a fingerprint that you get whenever you shoot from a particular gun. There's everything from the ejector, even where it impacts the deflector. There are things in there that are going to make a difference on that brass, so you can put two pieces of brass next to each other and you will be able to see a difference between rifles that are being fired. So if I want to show the pattern of where those spent brass casings went, let's take a look at where Crooks was. So I have this shot of him on top of the AGR building. In order to get my Google Maps shot from above to line up with where this picture is, I determined that based on where they show Crooks's body, you can see there's a downspout right near there, and one of the little runs over, and I'm calling those little strips in between on the roof, one over from that downspout is where Crooks's body is. So that's why I made these blue marks here, so you can see what I'm looking at in order to determine where this is on Google Maps. So I have my overhead map from Google Maps, and what I did was I wanted to get my dimensions of the roof so that I can use my new dimensions from where the spent brass went to determine not only where Crooks was, but where the brass actually went in relation to him. So I have the dimensions of the roof signified here. Now I'm able to place Crooks on here based on those measurements. Now we're assuming that he was about 6 foot tall. You see I have 71 inches there, so I have him at 5'11" right here. That's where it looks like his body was. It definitely mathematically is where he was, but again, I'm just assuming that that was his height. So if I take the measurements that I pulled from the range when I went and shot the brass, 84 inches away from me, that's 7 feet, right? Remember we said the closest brass fell 7 feet from the ejection port. That's 84 inches. So I measured out 84 inches using Google Maps. Then the widest span from left to right was 88 inches inside that area that the brass fell. So I measured out my 88 inches. Once I was done, this is what it looked like. I have Crooks there in blue. 7 feet to the right is where the area is that the brass falls. If you look at the yellow line is the ejection port going right. That's essentially going straight 3 o'clock is where that yellow line goes. So I'm showing you essentially where the ejection port was. It's in front of Crooks's head. If Crooks is in the prone position, the ejection port is about 8 to 12 inches in front of his head, depending on how he's holding the rifle. So the red square, that's the area that brass should have fallen based on my experiment. You see, I've got 8 foot 3 inches and 7 foot 3 inches going forward. Now, these are obviously the terms that were inches. We did have 88 inches and 100 inches, and again, that's what they convert to in feet. Now, where I have the yellow line, remember, there was 5 feet in front of me, in front of the ejection port whenever I went and shot, and 2 feet behind me that the rounds went. That yellow line is separating that. So below the yellow line is going to be 2 feet of distance, and in front of it is 5 feet of distance. Can I point something out real quick to you? Notice that according to my numbers and my measurements, that series of dots that you see going left to right, those are older vents and turbines that were on top of this roof. This roof was redone since this Google Map picture was taken. In other words, since these pictures were taken a year or so ago, AGR has redone this roof. That's why the roof looks different on a lot of the pictures that you've seen with crooks on it. So where you see those dots going across, that is the peak of the roof. So it's sloping up to where those dots are going across, and then it slopes back down going towards Trump on the other side of those dots. Note my square. If that's where the brass fell using my rifles, unless Crooks's rifle was overgassed, and we'll get into that in just a second, then his brass should not have gone past that peak onto the south side of that roof. So the three that they came back later and described on the south side of that roof should not have been there unless there was an issue with Crooks's gun, but it did not have, in my opinion, a gas block on it that could be adjusted. So it's unlikely it was overgassed, because usually those stock gas blocks are not going to be overgassed. Just to give you a general idea of how brass should fall, I found this graphic from Springco online. If you notice, most of the brass fell where it should have. You see in the green, healthy gas pattern. It looks like this Palmetto State might be slightly healthy, but a little unhealthy because it's slightly overgassed, because it was sending the brass more forward from 3 o'clock. It should have been straight out to the side or a little bit back. And as you noticed, more of them went forward into that 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock area. But nothing went 1 o'clock to, or at least nothing went to the 1 o'clock area that far forward. Now, according to everything I've done as far as this Palmetto State, and even the wind and weaponry rifle that I shot as well, none of these spent casings should have been where they picked the 3 up on the other side of the roof. Again, this is pretty basic, rudimentary stuff that I'm doing right here. We did not need to certify Guinness and everybody else to come in order to do this. This is basic stuff, right? Anybody shooting an AR-15 is pretty familiar with the trajectory of these spent casings and all that. So am I saying that somebody planted those 3 rounds on the other side of that peak? I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't. I'm saying that it's possible for those rounds to have made it up there if there was an issue with the firearm. If it was overgassed, that's the only way those rounds should fly forward, at least that far forward, because it's hitting that deflector. And boy, if it's hitting that deflector hard enough with enough oomph on it to send those rounds off that deflector and that far forward, we have a gas issue on that particular firearm. And again, most of those entry-level firearms do not come with an adjustable gas block. That means the gas at the front, you can adjust it to give you more or less gas. That's usually where people screw up, because they overgas it. These don't have those entry-level rifles don't. So it's unlikely that it was overgassed from the factory with the non-adjustable gas block on it. Now, if I'm not believing these guys that those 3 rounds actually came there from Crooks's gun, are we ever going to find out? Well, of course not. It's not like they're going to ever tell us what they did or what they didn't do, right? We know that. But there is another way to find out if those pieces of brass came from Crooks's gun or somebody else's, especially since we know they have Crooks's firearm, right? If they kept the brass, which you know they did, and hopefully they separated it, which maybe they didn't, but we could determine the differences between that brass if it in fact came from a different firearm. Looking at these 2 pieces of brass that I picked up off the ground, the one on the left is shot from the Palmetto State Armory AR-15, and the one on the right is from the Wind and Weaponry AR-15. At first glance, it doesn't seem like there's much different, but I want to show you a little bit here that are definite, if you want to call them fingerprints, as to what you'd look for. First of all, look at the primer strike. The primer strike on the left, the PSA, it's a shallower dimple. Notice where the dimple in the center is. Immediately right outside that area, you can see more of the brass of the primer. Look to the Wind and Weaponry one on the right. That dimple is pretty distinct, and it's much deeper than the dimple on the left. So there's a lot less material around that immediate circle on that primer. So that's a distinct difference. You definitely have the firing pin of the Wind and Weaponry that's hitting harder than the firing pin on the PSA. So the primer strike alone shows me a difference that would certainly tell me a story. but you're going to see here in a second a lot of other characteristics that are going to be on that brass that's going to tell us again the type of rifle that it came from, and you would be able to duplicate this using those same rifles. So I've got those same two pieces of brass here. I'm going to keep the Wyndham on the right and the PSA on the left. Start to notice some of the different markings. Everything from the side, you're going to see a dent on the side, a distinct dent. And then you're going to start to see things besides just that primer, scuff marks on the back side of that round. Now what I did here is I wanted to show you what an unfired round would look like. The one in the middle obviously has not been fired. Notice how clean, even around the rim and everything, how clean that thing is. So all those marks came from firing this particular round. Now the first thing I want you to look at is the extractor. The extractor is essentially a hook that grabs the lip or the rim of the round and grabs it and pulls it backwards. And the ejector is a spring-loaded device that's putting pressure on the back of that round so that when it gets to the ejection port and gets free, it immediately gets kicked out. So to give you a general idea, this right here is your extractor and this is your ejector. This ejector has a spring behind it and it pushes up on the round. So that extractor up at the top, that's kind of a claw. That grabs that rim of that brass, and you'll see what it does to it here in a second. So note the face of these. You're going to see scuff marks all along there, and you even see a little bit of brass that's kind of torn up here on the back side of this rim. That's the Wyndham round. You don't see that on the PSA one. Now looking at the sides here, this is where that deflector is hitting. Notice on the PSA one, the deflector is slightly hitting the side of the brass, where the Wyndham one is hitting it pretty hard, giving it a much bigger, almost twice the size dent on the side of that casing. This is where that dent comes from. When that brass is coming backwards like this, it hits that deflector, and that little rim that you see down there is what's giving us that mark on the side of that brass. This will give you a better idea of it. Notice how whenever it's going backwards like this, eventually the bolt slams to the back and it kicks that brass out, and that's where it's giving us that mark right there on the side of that brass. But notice we talked about the claw on the extractor. Look at the distinct marks on each one of these pieces of brass. They're actually noticeable. If you notice that the extractor is a much cleaner mark on the one on the right, which is the Wyndham round versus the PSA round. So these are things that are very easy to point out. All brass is going to look very similar being fired from the same gun. Okay friends, to be clear, you know we'll likely never get any real answers on all this, right? First of all, the inventory of the brass, it's all going to be thrown into one bag or one Ziploc or whatever. So it's probably not separated. They're not going to let us look at it. This is an ongoing investigation, right? If you wanted to know if that brass came from two different guns, you could easily conduct a study on that and determine that. You could very easily do that, especially if you had the firearm from Crooks. Obviously, they're stating there was not a second firearm that fired any of that brass, so we're not going to have one of those to experiment with. But if they let us have Crooks's firearm and they let us have all 8 pieces of brass, we could determine if those 8 pieces of brass came from that gun using what I did here between the logistics of where the brass fell once it was fired and looking at the quote fingerprint of the brass once it has been fired from that particular AR-15. Now to be clear, is every piece of brass going to go in the same direction? Of course not. Just for all of the guys out there that are going to say, oh, yeah, I'm making it very clear here. I said it before and I'll say it again. Brass is going to go where brass goes based on so many things. It might even be as something as simple as the humidity outside has an effect on that. But certainly the buffer weight does. Certainly the spring in the buffer makes a difference. The weight of your bolt carrier group, right? The gas, maybe you've shot your gun a lot and your gas tube is getting clogged up, getting, funked up in there. If you've adjusted your gas block, because if you do have one on there, you can increase or decrease the amount of gas that goes through there. There's so many things. Bullet weight, grain weight, you're going to have the amount of gunpowder in there. So there are a lot of variables out there. But if you're using the same gun to conduct this test, we could figure it out. If they would loan us Crooks's gun for a weekend, I could give you all the answers you wanted on that in a very unscientific study. We'd look like cavemen out there, but we could actually provide answers. Here we are going on 2 weeks, and nobody has given us any answers. I'd be willing to bet nobody has done any testing on this rifle. Nobody has looked through the evidence. They have made this an open and shut case. They are not investigating this. Now, granted,
Hello, this is Gray Hughes of Gray Hughes Investigates on YouTube. Please hit that like button, share, and subscribe. And if you could please watch the entire video, I would appreciate it. On the last video, the average watch time was 7 minutes, and you missed the important part that was at the end of the video, okay? So today's video is regarding where was the vehicle that Thomas Crooks drove. And it appears that he did drive a van. Based on an interview that was done with one of the local residents. In the interview, he explains that the van was on the street where he lived. And so we have, this is the area, the stage is over here, the AGR International building. There's a series of kind of buildings like this. Obviously, this is a building where the shooter was. The counter snipers were in this building here, apparently. There's some debate whether or not they were supposed to be on the roof. There's somebody out there, an official, that's claiming that was false information. That was put out there by the Pennsylvania State Police, that they weren't supposed to be there, that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. So that's still up in the air, apparently. All right, but we do know that they say that he had his vehicle and it wasn't right in the area. And Christopher Ray said that, but he didn't give any specifics of where it was. So somebody sent me this video last night. It was a TikTok version. I found the original version on Fox News, and it's an interview with Alexis McAdam with one of the local residents, and he describes what he saw, and I tried to use that video to determine what street the van was found on. So let's take a look at the interview right now.
Can tell yet, but okay, I'm gonna talk to him right now. I'm gonna bring him in. This is Billy Toma, Martha, who we've been talking to. We actually met him out there at the scene yesterday. He lives right near where this all happened at that rally, and you also recorded some video. As we see now, this suspect's van was parked right in your street, and they all kind of had it closed off, Martha, because they didn't want people from the rally to park on your street. So then you knew this guy's car wasn't supposed to be there. Walk me through what you saw.
So I came home,
but I'll keep playing it. But in the background, you see these series of buildings. Looks maybe like a nursery or something. Just looks kind of like you can see through it. Not really sure, but there's 3 buildings back there, and then this building.
a little bit before 5, saw it parked there. Didn't really think too much of it. It was the only spot in the whole yard, or the whole road, that wasn't blocked off. So later on in the night, everything happened, and we got home, and we were sitting there and saw cops all lined on the street. So whenever we looked out, we walked outside and saw them opening up his vehicle and everything. When the cop opened it, everybody else jumped back and was trying to stay out of the way. Here I am worried about it blowing up or whatever's going on. So,
I mean, to find out that this happens and the former president gets shot nearly right in the head, almost assassinated across the street from your house, and then to find out that the gunman's car was possibly parked right in front.
Yeah, they said nearly across the street from his house. It's not really
Front of your house. How many cops are we talking about?
And now she's saying that it was parked right in front of his house.
That were out there surrounding this van. And was there a license plate on the back of that van?
There was probably 5 to 10 cars out there, and there was an Arizona plate on the van. And there was probably 15 cops altogether, all outside of the van. And then, like I said, whenever the one opened up the door, the rest of them all jumped back trying to stay out of the way.
Did the police talk to you at all? I know you were out there with your son. Were you guys worried for your safety?
We weren't not worried, but yeah, we didn't talk to any cops or anything. They waved hello, but that was about it. So.
Okay, well, thanks for talking to us. So that's just kind of some of the witnesses.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's pretty crazy. This guy actually lives on the street where the van was, and he saw the van at about 5 o'clock when he came home, and then later in the evening when law enforcement was canvassing around, they must have found the van somehow, and that's when he went outside and filmed it, and the interactions with the van, how they were startled when they apparently saw some explosive devices in there, and then they towed it away, and this individual here, Mr. Toma, filmed the vehicle being towed away. All right, so let's try to figure out where this was. And I've already done this, but I just want to show you how I was doing it. So I was looking around trying to find where you can see series of buildings like that. You know, I was looking all over the place, and I saw this. But when you're watching the video, in the background, there's a building right there, right? So when you're looking at that, you look down here and you go, well, there's no building that looks like that. But I decided to go to Street View anyways, because I know sometimes buildings are built.
I think this is the event that brings citizen journalism to the appreciation of more people than COVID did. COVID, it was so censored, but now it's like everyone's got footage. Everybody's going through logical questions and trying to reason their way forward based on evidence. They're dealing with a lot of contradictions. They're trying to think through that. And I think it's a collaborative effort. And I don't think any one perspective that we've seen shows you everything, which is why we try to show you these various perspectives as they drop throughout the week. Did you guys have any comments on that last block?
Well, I mean, just to your point right there, you know, a lot of the people in the media, alternative media, who have done a lot of work around COVID and reporting that, like, I had to learn how to like read scientific papers, you know what I mean? Like I had to like come up to speed on a lot of things, which I feel like I have quite a bit, but at the same time, you know, I wasn't doing much of that like prior to 2020. Whereas this community of people that are presenting this are like absolute experts with firearms, with ballistics, with like, you know, security, protection details, protocols, everything. And so, you know, these people already have channels with big followings. And so the information is able to proliferate pretty quickly with people that are like have a high level of expertise in these areas for sure. So
yeah, it's pretty cool. And
yeah.
Grand Theft World listeners, I mean, you guys are the most informed audience on the planet. So well played for having long attention spans.
Yeah. Absolutely.
LD, did you see anything in there that caught your ear or eye?
More questions. I mean, I still want answers. I would want answers if I were up on Capitol Hill questioning people. You know, who touched the gun, who moved it. I don't believe that the dude was shot and dropped the gun 8 feet away.
Well, so, to be accurate, when that dude's dead, they would separate the body from the weapon. They'd give him a medical inspection. That guy with the red gloves earlier is the second medical inspection because they're like, somebody already checked him. Right. But then the guy with the body camera, if you rewatch that 28 minutes of footage carefully, the guy with the body camera, when the other guy, there's a sergeant from the Pennsylvania State Police, he's down on one knee and he's like an EOD guy, maybe checking him for bombs or something. And that's when they discover the detonator, I think. And when he's looking for the rangefinder, the guy with the camera who just got there said, I think the rangefinder's in his cargo pocket, a left cargo pocket.
Right.
So maybe he could see it, but how does he know that's the range? It was just very strange and prescient how he had that information that the guy searching the body didn't have. So there's a lot to be learned, I think, from those studies.
Yeah. And I get that would be standard to remove the weapon, but I think it just needs to be.
Are his prints on the weapon?
Specific,
is there powder burns on his hands? Powder burns. Are his fingerprints on the shell casings that are found on the roof? Because if he packed that magazine and he didn't use rubber gloves, he's got prints on the case. There's a whole bunch of things you can check for, and they usually do.
Yeah, I guess what makes me think about it is we had that overhead shot of the gun 7 or 8 feet away from him. That was sort of what we had originally, but nobody's on the roof. So, you know, somebody went up, checked on and moved it. Then all those people are back up there. It's strange.
It is strange
So
because they
much
almost had to send a
strangeness.
drone up to get that shot of him on the roof,
Right. Which,
you know? And why did he register? I'm still confused about why he registered.
and I'm interested to see where it goes with the van and the Arizona plates. If that comes to anything.
Yes. I mean, because the first reported vehicle is he drove a like Hyundai Sonata or something like that. And I was thinking, well, how did he get the big ladder? Because they said he bought a Home Depot ladder. How did he put the 12-foot ladder in the Hyundai Sonata? And then they said he bought a 5-foot ladder. So I was like, okay, that would fit in that car. And still, you know, where did he park? I had a question about that. And he had devices in there, and the device had a telescoping, you know, antenna. So that means it could be further away. Like, what was the backpack by the bicycle? All these little things that they're telling us about the crime don't necessarily add up very well at all. They add up like Common Core math is what the problem is here.
Yeah, exactly. Man. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah,
This
they're going to
is
let us know
very-
next week.
Yeah, this is a very interesting one for sure.
Twice a year, I teach a course called Autonomy. It's a 12-week course. It teaches leadership, entrepreneur skills, executive skills, all these types of things that I saw were taken out of our education system in order to make the schooling or indoctrination system that we've all probably went through. And it has served us well enough to be interchangeable cogs in the machine of the globalists. But if we want a homestead, if we want write our own ticket, work from home job, work from anywhere type of situation, they're not exactly handing those out at the end of college. They give you a piece of paper and they're like, good luck. So reality is dropping us off here, but the demands of reality are up here. So I created Autonomy to help people close that gap for themselves so they can level up their skills to the demands of the situations that life is putting in front of us presently. Life's demands of intellect and understanding precision and complexity are ever increasing. The schooling didn't prepare us for it. The media is not going to do anything but reinforce what schooling prepared us for. And so we're going to have to take a leadership position and take steps off the beaten path to kind of blaze our own trail in life. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job
So as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.